here. Let me go ahead and start the recording. Our presenter has been an escrow officer since 1977, and it is Ms. Juliana Tu with Viva Escrow Incorporated, one of the first escrow officers of Chinese descent in the state of California. Whether paying it forward or giving it back, Juliana is committed to making a difference in the escrow industry. All industry partners like the real estate and mortgage industries and all the industry organizations, the California Escrow Association, the American Escrow Association, and the Escrow Institute of California. This commitment has led to various positions which have helped her fulfill her goals. In 2019, she was the first and hopefully not the last Chinese American president of the California Escrow Association. Juliana is a member of the Escrow Advisory Committee of the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation, previously known as the Department of Business Oversight, and she is a member of the Los Angeles County Assessors Advisory Council. She published her book, The Art of Escrow, in 2012. During this pandemic, she took on a new project and is continuously working to put all her knowledge into YouTube videos under her channel, Think Escrow. Feel free to look it up and subscribe. She also has her own website at juliana2.com. In case you're interested, the professional designations behind her name are for Certified Senior CSEO is for Certified Senior Escrow Officer, CEO, Certified Escrow Officer, CBSS, Certified Bulk Sales Specialist, and CEI, Certified Escrow Instructor. She is also a Senior American Settlement Industry Professional, and as conferred by the American Escrow Association. For Juliana, her motto has always been to pay it forward. Knowledge and experience do not mean anything if it is not used for the benefit of others or not passed on to the new generation of escrow officers. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Juliana to say a couple words, and then we'll get right into the presentation.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you very much. Yes, I am most happy today to talk about bulk sales or business opportunities. I have pre-recorded my presentation so that it comes out smoothly and it can be shared with others later. If you have any questions, Stephanie and I decide that if you go ahead and type it into the chat box, then I will work on addressing them at the very end. So if you have other questions you feel are more complicated, feel free to call me at Viva Escrow, and then I can answer your questions one-to-one. I have also given Stephanie a couple of handouts, a take sheet and a bulk sale transaction cost sheet for your information, which she will give to you. So thank you, Stephanie. Let's go for it.
Awesome. And just for those who are interested, the handout I just uploaded into the chat box, so you can download it at this time, or I will also email it to attendees at the end of the presentation as well. So having said that, if you have additional questions, please feel free to type them in the chat and Juliana will get to them at the end of the presentation. So we will go ahead and get started here.
As a real estate professional, you may get asked questions when your client wants to buy or sell a business. Compared to the sale of real estate, the sale of a business is an animal of a different kind. To answer your clients competently, it is important for you to know how different it is, why it is different, and most important, how to prepare for it. Knowledge is power. This is Juliana Tu, President and Escrow Manager of Viva Escrow. I've been running around in the escrow industry for over 40 years and running Viva Escrow for the last 20 or so. And that is my aim today, to give you the knowledge to be able to give to your clients and answers to their questions. But first of all, the very important disclaimer. The presentation is intended for educational, informational, and group discussion. The content provided here is not intended to create, modify, or replace your company's policies and procedures. Nothing in the presentation is intended to provide legal advice or legal presentation. You are urged to seek advice from competent legal and or accounting counsel. Now, the sale of a business opportunity is also called a bulk sale or an asset sale, in the California escrow industry, and it characterizes the sale of an ongoing business. Compared to selling real property, selling personal property is really an animal of a different kind, like I said before. So handling this type of transaction will be different, and the tools we use are also different. What types of businesses can be sold? It can be as varied as whatever stores you see down a street of commercial businesses. For example, a donut shop, restaurants, convenience stores or liquor stores, car washes, car dealerships, a hotel or motel, or any type of service business like a dental office, optometrist, massage parlors, to name a few. Every business that exists can be sold and purchased, but there are regulatory and processing differences. So these transactions should always go through a neutral third party, the escrow agent, who is sufficiently experienced to handle the transaction of its type. Bulk sales is a sale of anything that is not real property. So what is real property? Land, dirt, and the immovable structure on it. Bulk sale is the sale of personal property. Some attorneys call it an asset sale, but it can also be a part of the sale of real property on which the business is located. Here are some points of differences between a bulk sales and real property sales. Bulk sales regulations can be bound under the Uniform Commercial Code, the UCC, or if there's a liquor license involved, the Business and Professions Code, the BNP. There will be no preliminary report issued by the title company, but instead there will be, under the UCC code, a search done at the Secretary of State's office and the County Recorder's office for liens and information filings on the business and the owner of the business. Another distinct difference is that it calls for a publication in newspapers in the judicial district where the business is located. This will give the creditors and the vendors notification and sufficient time to submit their claims for payment. The sale can be included with tangible assets, of course, which are assets that you can see or count, inventory, fixtures, and equipment or client lists, and intangible assets, assets that you cannot see but has value, like the reputation. We call that goodwill. It calls for the escrow holder to contact government agencies to get a clearance of seller's tax liabilities after the close of escrow, but before the seller gets his proceeds. And as the businesses may occupy a location that is rented or leased, it calls for the buyer to first get a landlord approval to be the new tenant. And finally, the transfer of the business ownership is delivered by a bill of sale, not a recording of a grant deed. I will be using a number of acronyms throughout this PowerPoint. So here's a list of some commonly used ones. Learn them, and when you go to escrow, your escrow officer will be so impressed. ABC, Alcohol and Beverage Control Department. BNP, Business and Professions Code. The CDTFA, California Department of Tax and Fee Administration, which deals with the collection of sales tax on products. Previously, they were part of the State Board of Equalization, but they split from the BOE in 2017. Some people still refer to the Sales Tax Collection Department as the State Board or the BOE, probably because the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration is a huge mouthful to remember and pronounce. The EDD, which is the Employment Development Department, the FTB, which is the Franchise Tax Board, and I'm so sorry, the FF&E, Furniture, Fixtures, and Equipment. Those are the stuff that is going to be actually part of the asset sale. The FTB, like I mentioned before, and the SOS, which is the Franchise the Secretary of State. Finally, the UCC, which is the Uniform Commercial Code. How much time do we need? That is probably the first question that any buyer or seller asks when they have a new transaction. The answer depends on the type of transaction. Minimum time required is about 20 to 25 days. The standard that we all ask everyone for is 30 days. But if there is an alcohol license that has to be transferred, give it 90 days, please. Of course, a more complicated transaction with many moving parts, like a car dealership, no pun intended, may require months. So what does escrow need from you in order to help them open the escrow smoothly? This is what you should provide escrow to open the escrow. It's not that different from a residential sale. You need the purchase contract if there's any, the commission amount and the other agent's information, the good faith deposit. That is important because without the money in escrow, we cannot start the publication and the UCC searches. We, of course, need the buyer's full name and contact information, and we will need the seller's full name and contact information. What is different is that we will also need a copy of the business license, a copy of the CDTFA's seller's resale permit, if the business has any. And this is, of course, only for businesses that have products that they sell retail. A copy of the ABC license, and a copy of the existing lease and amendments if the buyer is assuming it. We will use all this paperwork to establish the names of the owners of the business and confirm the location address. You would be surprised how different we find this information from what the seller actually gave you to sign the contract. Now, the process. Let me summarize a little what happens in the process itself. The first thing that we do, of course, is that we prepare the opening package. This is the same as with any real estate transaction. And once the signed opening package comes back, then the publication clock starts. Unlike a real estate transaction in which the parties tend to delay the return of the opening documents, you cannot delay this in a bulk sale transaction because we must publish 12 business days before closing and for vendor notification, and we must order the UCC search. Now, this form for publication is included in the opening package, so it needs to be signed and returned. When the UCC search comes back, just like we do the preliminary title report, we will order the liens and the payoffs. We will follow up also on the new lease or assignment of lease. We will notify the government agencies of the sale. And once the publication has gone into the community, the vendor claims will start to come in. So we must then notify the seller of any claims that we have received so that they can approve it or they can disapprove it. We will also prepare the estimate closing statements for the parties. And if there's an ABC license, we will send in the authorization to close, which is called Form 226, to ABC to request a transfer of the license. And I will be talking a little bit more about this later on. Once the 12 business days of publication has passed, and after the ABC sends back the Form 226, we can close escrow. But we will have to hold the seller's funds until the releases from the CDTFA, the EDD, and the FTB are in. So there you go. Another bulk sale transaction completed. Oh, if only things were that easy. What will help us with the process? A lot depends on what is given to the escrow. And here is where the real estate professional can facilitate the escrow process. First of all, we would like to get the exact name of the seller to match the ABC and the CDTFA licenses, if there are any? Is there someone on the license who's not in the contract? Why not? What do we do with these other persons? For instance, a family relative, an old partner who's no longer involved in the business. Because according to regulations, once they are no longer part of the business, the change has to be made at ABC and CDTFA. So if they have not been, the change has not been made, that means they have to be a part of our transaction and have to sign all the paperwork. Next, has the buyer decided on the name that they wish to purchase under? They should make up their minds in the beginning, because we do not want to republish, and we have to match their application for the ABC license transfer with our paperwork. Is the buyer perhaps purchasing under a corporate entity or a trust? We will need their corporate entity documents or a copy of their trust. ABC will require the buyer's spouse to be on the application. So, is the spouse included in the escrow? And if buyer's ABC application will be under a corporate entity, like a corporation or an LLC, ABC may investigate all members of this corporate entity or trust if they have more than 10% interest. Does the seller have any other businesses under the same seller's resale permit? If they do, we need to take it into account with the CDTFA. We need to let them know that the release that we're going to need is only going to be for that one particular location that we're handling in escrow. Is the seller's corporate office in another location? If it is, we will need to publish in the judicial location of that corporate office. This happens when the seller has a chain of stores and the main executive office is at a particular location. Is the seller an out-of-state corporation? If so, not only do we need the evidence of good standing issued by the California Secretary of State, we will also need the good standing from the Secretary of State in the state that they are registered in. And we are also going to need to do a search in that particular state. Do we know if the trade name or the business name is included? This is usually the name that is on the sign above the door. Is the inventory and the stock and trade remaining going to be included at closing? If there is a seller's resale permit, the seller will then need to do an allocation of sales price to break down the fixtures, furniture, and equipment, the FF&E. Sales tax on that amount is to be paid by the buyer to the seller at closing. Then the seller has to, in turn, pay it to the CDTFA on the final return. So is time going to be your friend or your foe? When the buyer and the seller return the opening package, the notice to creditors and the notice of intent to transfer liquor license are sent to the newspaper service to publish in the weekly community newspaper and to be recorded at the county recorder's office. But publication doesn't just happen the next day after we get the signed notices. So how do you count the 12 days needed for publication? The newspapers we use are the small throwaway newspapers in the community, like the San Gabriel Valley Tribune, the Pasadena Weekly, and so forth. Normally, we need to get the notice to the creditors, to the publication company on a Monday so that they can typeset it on Tuesday, and then it is published on a Wednesday or Thursday. If the Monday deadline is not met, then the publication will be delayed for 1 week. And that means the tentative closing date will also be delayed 1 week. The 12 business days start counting from the date of publication. At the same time, we are going to order the UCC search on the business names and the seller's names from the Secretary of State. And we will also follow up to see if the buyers obtain his landlord's lease approval. Let me make a note. that we prefer that the buyer start obtaining his landlord lease approval before he even enters into the escrow transaction. Because if the landlord does not approve the buyer, or the buyer does not approve the lease, it's good to know all this before the escrow is actually opened and work has started. So once the publication starts, the clock starts ticking. Okay, what is the UCC search? It is a report on the liens against the business and the owner at that location. What is the purpose of the UCC search? Just like a preliminary title report, the search engine is used to find out what types of liens and encumbrances are filed against the business and the owner with the Secretary of State and the County Recorder's Office. By the way, most of the time, commercial loans are filed against the real property with a deed of trust, and any attached fixtures and equipment that is part of running that business is filed with the Secretary of State using a UCC financing statement. The UCC search will also tell us if the seller is in good standing with the Franchise Tax Board, meaning if they are paid up to date with their FTB corporate filings. And like the prelim, both the buyer and the seller have to approve the UCC search. Like a real property transaction, the escrow has to order they pay off on the liens. Talking about the liens, checking the creditor claims and successor liabilities. What is one of the ultimate purposes for the UCC bulk sale law? The purpose for doing this publication. What is it? Well, when a business is sold, how do the creditors know? The law then provides for their protection, and so the purpose of the publication is to give creditors public disclosure that the business is being sold so that they can go ahead and put in their claims during the 12 business days and get those claims paid at closing. Of course, the seller has the right to approve or disapprove the claim, and if it is approved, it is paid at closing. If it is disapproved, then the creditor is notified at closing, and that amount is held according to the UCC code from the seller's proceeds. The creditor then has 25 days to attach this claim to the seller directly. If the claim is not submitted within the 12 business days, the seller can still disapprove it, and the escrow then has no obligation to pay or even to hold the funds for it. If the claim is not submitted within the 12 days, there is no obligation of the seller to pay, and there would be no successor liabilities attached to the buyer. So it is important for the escrow to be sure that the full 12 business days are passed before the closing. Notifying the government agencies is the second ultimate purpose for the UCC bulk sale law. The escrow holder has an obligation to notify the government agencies so that a certificate of release of the buyer is obtained. This would release the buyer of this business's any successor liabilities to the seller's tax liabilities. So the notification goes out to the tax collector, the EDD, the FTB, the CDTFA, and letting them know that there's a sale going through and they should be looking to the seller to file their final returns on the business. If the business is a clean one, meaning they have filed their returns faithfully, a certificate of release for the buyer can come in a few weeks. But I warn you, the CDTFA is known to pull many of their files for audit before they will issue a release. So, finally, are we closing yet? The estimate closing statements are prepared to show the amount needed from the buyer to close and to show the net proceeds that the seller will have once we release the hold. Is the landlord or the new lease or assumption of the lease completed yet? Are the 12 business days done? Now we will ask the clients to determine what day to close and which day will be the last day of the seller's operation and the buyer's possession. Now, this could be easier said than done. Many times the sellers and the buyers will have to look for a date that is easy to draw a line on or an auspicious date. So on the determined date, the buyer takes over the business. The seller files all of his final returns so that the releases can come in. Escrow holds the seller's proceeds until the releases are in, and the file is balanced, commissions paid, vendors and other bills are paid. Here's a notation. From time to time, the CDTFA, whose guidelines fall under the Revenue and Taxation Code, will send escrow a notice of amount due. This notice calls for the full sales price to be sent to them as a conditional release. If that is the case, the escrow will hold the full sales price and no one gets paid at closing until the actual certificate of payment is given. But it doesn't happen all the time. So you must ask your escrow officer in advance, without having received this notice of amount due and conditional release, will they normally hold the full sales price at closing? Or do they pay all the necessary bills and hold the seller's proceeds only? That is something that you probably would like to know in advance. Now, when there is a liquor license, then the closing is not as straightforward. First and foremost, the Department of Alcohol and Beverage Control, ABC, is king of the jungle. There are many different types of licenses. Beer and wine are the most common and easy to transfer. Hard liquor licenses are limited in certain areas. The liquor could be on sale, meaning selling and drinking on the premises, or it could be off sale, meaning drinking only off the premises. There are also licenses for clubs and special entertainment. So here is what we need to watch for in the transfer of the ABC license. First of all, it takes 60 to 90 days for a license investigation to finalize. They will require the license transfer application to be posted on the premises for 30 days so that anyone who disagrees with the license transfer will come forward. Sometimes the store or business brings a bad element into the neighborhood, and if there are any ongoing issues, this is the time to let ABC know. So you must start the escrow also with the correct buyer's names that they will use to apply for the license. Don't change the buyer's names when the notice of intent to transfer is recorded, because then we will have to redo the whole process. All ABC required paperwork needs to be filed or recorded correctly, or will need to be redone, refiled, and this will delay closing. So it's very important that we get all the proper information at the beginning. Now, as mentioned before, ABC will require spouses and all corporate entities members to be investigated, especially the spouse, because they can't imagine that the spouse will not be helping tend the restaurant or the store or selling the liquor license when it's an individual purchasing it. And this is important. ABC will not allow any funds to be pre-released to a seller or paid to a seller outside of escrow. Everything has to go through escrow, and no monies can be given until the license transfers. Okay, and the license will transfer once the ABC authorization to close form, ABC 226 form, is sent to the escrow holder. If the buyer is getting a new loan, the lender has to be in a position to fund this loan anytime the ABC gives the authorization to close. So the escrow is going to need an unconditional letter of funding from the lender. It takes about 2 weeks after we send in the ABC 226 form to request the transfer of license. So you have to figure that into your timeline. After everything has come in, we have to send the 226 form back, and then we wait for approximately 2 weeks for them to transfer. And when the license is transferred, we must close escrow immediately. No ifs, ands, or buts. The license is then under the buyer's name, and any problems or violations for the sale of alcohol from then on will become the buyer's responsibility, even if it was sold by the seller. Where would I be if I didn't give you a few tips for a smooth closing? Most of these tips that I'm going to talk about, I have mentioned before, but it deserves to be mentioned again because they are important. First of all, get landlord approval first. No lease approval, no operation of the business. Make sure that you have the buyer's exact name at opening. And if the buyer or the seller are using their corporate entities, we will need all of their corporate documents at opening, just like a real estate transaction. If this business has a seller's resale permit, think about the allocation of consideration form, which the escrow will provide. As mentioned before, the amount assigned to the FF&E will require sales tax to be paid on it by the buyer to the seller, who then pays it to the CDTFA. So for instance, if you have a $250,000 sale of a restaurant and you put in $50,000 as the FF&E, and if the city and the county sales tax is 9.5%, for instance, then the amount to pay is $4,750, and that has to be calculated into the closing figures. Escrow is going to have to provide this allocation form to the CDTFA when we are asking for a release. What we will also need to provide to the CDTFA is a list of the FF&E that are included. Now, this form will also be given to the clients at opening. At a glance, does it exceed the $50,000 that you say is the allocation? Remember, all of the FF&E is used and depreciated equipment. But if the CDTFA should question the list and the declaration, the seller should be prepared to defend the amounts that he has given. Do you know in advance if the seller has enough money to pay all his debts? If the seller tells you that he has too much debt for the sales price, I will tell you, I will not do the escrow. The problems associated with that are numerous, and there are not many escrow officers who are willing to handle a transaction in which the debts exceed the sales price. Does the seller's name match what is on his licenses? Why does it not match? We will have to use the name that appears on the ABC license. And if there's no ABC license, then we have to match it to the CDTFA seller's resale permit. Does the seller have a corporate office that is different from this business location? And where is it? We will have to publish at that corporate office location too. So that's another extra step and an extra money. Is the seller a corporate entity organized in another state? If so, what state? We will have to search the SOS in that state also. Extra step, extra money. Now that you have the nitty-gritty of a bulk sale with and without a liquor license involved, let's talk about that special transaction in which you have both the real property and the business sold together. This is when you combine everything you know about a real property sale process and add it to the business sale process that I covered here. So here are a few very special questions that your escrow officer is also going to ask you. Are the buyers and the sellers the same legal entity? If not, we're going to require 2 separate escrows. If the escrows are separated, What is the purchase price and the loan amount for each? And are both escrows going to be concurrent on each other? Here are some different animals from this zoo that I'm talking about and combinations of two types of transactions and what the escrow officer will ask you. On a hotel motel situation, the sale of the business can be separated from the real property on which the business stands. And this is very evident in the sale of hotels and motels. So you need to let the escrow officer know if it is the sale of the property with the sale of the business right up front. Another component is the disposition of any other businesses that operate within the hotel. For instance, restaurants and other shops. Are they separate, or are they owned by these people, or are they operated by others? If they are operated by others, then they are only considered as tenants, and proration of the leases and the security will be involved. Again, will it be the same seller and the same buyer entity for each part? If any of those other businesses in the sale have a liquor license included, then you have to remember we have to add in the additional concern for the transfer of that license. Think of the breakdown of the sales price for the real property and of each individual other businesses. This is where the consultation with the CPA for the buyer and the seller become very important. And then there are car dealerships, which can, of course, be very complicated. But gratefully, most of them have attorneys involved. They have attorney-driven contracts, and the attorneys control the process. These transactions tend to have a long due diligence time period, and it needs approval from the national auto brand. The attorneys who work on breakdowns in the inventory parts and miscellaneous items that will remain at closing may not provide this to you or to the escrow until after the closing. So those amounts could be paid between parties separately outside of the escrow. Gas stations. Gas stations can have several components. The gas station itself, a separate auto repair shop, a mini mart, or a convenience store, and all of these could be under different ownerships. So which are being sold? The gas station needs a contingency of the buyer being able to obtain their chosen gas brand approval and letter that evidences this approval. If the convenience store, if there is one, sells beer and wine, well, then we need a liquor license transfer and ABC approval. And due diligence is very important on a gas station. Is there ground contamination? Do we have or do we need a phase 1, a phase 2, or 3? And is there remediation needed? Is there a super lien fund that we have to be concerned with? Convenience stores or liquor stores. These are businesses which sell products and goods for retail purposes. The CDTFA plays a large role because of the nature of the business. All proceeds should be held pending release from the CDTFA. I do not recommend holding just a part of the proceeds at closing in any bulk transaction, but especially not where it is a convenience or a liquor store, because the sales tax on such non-perishable goods that the store must pay to the CDTFA each month could be high, depending on how well the store is doing. And there is usually an inventory count prior to closing, and depending on the agreement between the clients, the cost of inventory remaining is usually separate from the sale of the business, usually purchased at seller's cost. Again, if there's an ABC license, most of the time there is, of course, the transfer process may require more time. It also means that the sales tax on liquor sales may substantially increase the amount of monthly tax to the CDTFA. From time to time, I will get a liquor license transfer only. There are times when this liquor license is held, but the business that it operated under had to close down or was sold without the liquor license. The owner of that license then has the right to sell the liquor license by itself. It is an asset and it does have some value. But first, one notation to bring up. A liquor license in a business cannot be used, held, or mentioned as a collateral for anything. This is because the license cannot be automatically transferred. ABC must approve any transfer of the license to another entity or person. ABC will not allow the license to be used as collateral. An ABC license transfer falls under the B&P code, and it requires an escrow company to handle the sale of the license, even when there are no other assets involved. This type of an escrow will not require a UCC search or a publication of a notice to creditors, but it will require a recording of a notice of intent to transfer the license with the county recorder's office. Sometimes the holder of the license and the seller can be a government agency, for instance, the CDTFA, who may have taken over or foreclosed on the license when the business could not pay their delinquent sales taxes. When a buyer is purchasing a license only, they are going to have to specify where that license will be located because ABC has got to approve the location. Finally, the last animal that I will talk about is the sale of a service business. Medical offices, educational schools, P.O. box companies, massage parlors, escrow companies. What we call a service business is one that does not sell a physical product. And unless they do sell some type of a product, there will be no seller's resale permit issued by the CDTFA or the payment of sales tax on the fixtures and equipment, as it will be exempt as a one-time sale only. But it is good to confirm that the business does not have a seller's permit right at the beginning. For instance, a dental office would normally not have a resale permit, unless, of course, they sell dental hygiene accessories. However, the other releases from the EDD, the FTB, are necessary for assurances that the seller has paid all his employer taxes and unemployment taxes. So the main components of a service business sale are the goodwill, which is the name and reputation, maybe the client list, and of course, the regular ongoing business that continues to come in. There are other personal property sales that will require an escrow transaction, which I will not mention today. One is that is getting a lot of traction right now is the sale of manufactured homes, also known as mobile homes. These homes are getting a big comeback now because regular single-family residents are becoming less and less affordable. Obviously, they don't quite look like what I have here on my slide. The stigma of the mobile home is also being washed away, and you will find some very luxurious ones in very nice parks for much less cost than a standard single-family residence. If these manufactured homes are not attached to the ground, then they are still considered personal property and handled even more differently than other bulk sales. If you have questions regarding mobile homes, contact me separately and I will give you the name and number of an escrow officer who handles that particular kind of transaction, as I do not do them myself. Thank you all. We appreciate all the time and attention that you have given me during this long session. Feel free to contact me at any time or to subscribe to my news articles every month. Here are my website addresses. And in addition, I welcome you to visit my Think Escrow channel and for educational and YouTube videos regarding the basics of escrow, the art of escrow, and my stories from the escrow trenches on YouTube. If you have any questions, please let me know. I thank you very much.
Well, that was a lot to cover, wasn't it, in 45 minutes? Can you all hear me? Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask? I know that we went through quite a lot of stuff in a very short period of time, but it's just a basic guideline to what happens in a bulk sale escrow transaction. So are there any questions from anybody? If you would like to unmute yourself, I think you can ask that question. Because we do have like another 10 or 15 minutes. Anybody?
Juliana, we did have one question in the chat box come in. Someone's asking if we can share the PowerPoint slides.
Yes, if you can provide them with the link to the PowerPoint, the one that I had given you, they can go on there and they can listen to it again and again. If it helps.
No problem. I will email that out to everyone then.
Yeah. And then of course the bulk sale handouts are just some general questions that most people ask us when they open up a bulk sale, especially about the costs. And it's pretty much like the real property costs, but there's different things that are charged. So like the publication costs and the UCC stuff and the leasehold assignment funds, those are pretty different. So hopefully that will help you. I also have some shorter versions of this bulk sale presentation on my YouTube channel, Think Escrow, because the attention span is not that long for many of the younger generation real estate professionals. I don't want to say that I'm older, but I certainly am older than a lot of people. So I try to break them down into two portions, and you can find those bulk sale presentations also in my YouTube channel. And especially for those real estate professionals that are starting out in the business, because they have to get knowledge from somewhere, and hopefully this will help them.
I don't see any other questions. We did have one person ask if you have any videos available on your channel regarding land purchase.
Regarding what kind of purchases?
Land purchases.
Land purchases, like vacant land or something, that's pretty much just like real property, but without the structure on it. So land purchases, usually, no, I don't have a video on just simply land purchases, but I do have them on real estate purchases and for buyers and sellers and so forth.
If there's no other questions or anything else, Juliana, we can go ahead and end. And if anyone has any additional questions, feel free to reach out directly to Juliana, or you can send them to me, and I will put you in touch with her. But yeah, I just want to thank you so much again, everyone, for joining us. And thank you, Juliana, for the vital information about bulk sales. It was extremely informative, and hopefully helps everyone have some successes with that. And thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their week.
Yes, have a good day. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you for joining me.
Bye, everyone. Have a great rest of your afternoon.